Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Forgive me if I sound a bit tired or out of it at this point, but for no reason whatsoever, not for no reason whatsoever, but I got into a huge, my entire day was pretty much me adding and arguing with the communists. Oh boy. It's so fucking stupid. I don't really... it came because I critiqued an article made by, some guy from the Socialist Equality Party, the World Socialist website, and, some other baseless, anti-AOC crap that they were pushing. And then, literally, it was, being pushed into the point where, then they were, adding me, oh, are you a fascist? Are you a liberal? You're a liberal. And, doing the basic shit of, oh, you have to read, theory, and you have to read this to understand blah, blah, blah. It's the revolution is where it's at. AOC is not the answer. And it's I spent the entire day, and it's oh my god, shut up. If they literally just maybe said, hey, maybe you should look into this book and then be done with it. But they were, going at, they were literally attacking me, pretty much. I mean, I don't care, because these are the same guys that were literally, praising Stalin and, China and stuff. So it's their booze mean nothing to me. I've seen what makes them cheer. In fact, they're still probably going to be adding me, and I really don't care. It's who cares? I don't care. I mean, it did get me to the point where I actually tested my editing skills pretty well and discovered something new about my software, so I guess that's one good thing. Because they were, going all and on about, the revolution and blah, blah, blah. And it's I'm starting to think maybe Joseph McCarthy was right. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. That's a lie. That's a joke. Believe it or not, I do jokes on this podcast, fools. And to all my communist viewers who saw that intro and got offended, well, sucks to be you. Don't worry, I assume you're one of the good ones. Basically, my rule with communism is this: if you don't praise the literal authoritarian regime leaders like Stalin, or, I'm not even saying don't praise aspects of their country, obviously, because there are aspects of all the countries and all the world you can praise, but also don't pretend like you're the end-all be-all ideology. That's one problem I have with communists, with again being a bit more of a mini rant. They literally believe that their ideology is the end-all be-all. But fine, I'm moving past it because it's legit. I'm so done with communism, man. It's what? These guys don't win me over. They're not winning me over. This whole thing, they keep saying, oh, well, it's that whole meme about, the toxic Bernie bro stuff. It's these guys are just, so freaking toxic. There are accounts that were literally, I have, again, eclipse me many times over that, quote tweet me, and then it's just yeah, I'm so won over to communism due to this. Okay, so on to the main topic of this video. Honestly, I don't even kind of want to do this episode anymore. I'm just freaking tired. But I'll do it anyway, because I give a shit about my fans more than I give a shit about communists. Hey yo! Anyways, let's move on to the first story. Former Florida state senator arrested in scheme to fund a bogus no-party candidate. Former Florida GOP state senator Frank Artiles has been arrested for his role in a scheme to fund a bogus no-party affiliated candidate to help siphon votes away from the Democrat in the state Senate race last year. The contest featured Democratic incumbent Jose Rodriguez falling to his GOP opponent Elena Garcia by a razor-thin 32-vote margin. Alex Rodriguez, the no-party affiliation candidate, who shares the same last name as the Democrat, is a little-known auto parts dealer who captured more than 6,000 votes despite the zero in campaigning. This is something that happens quite often with, minor parties. One of the two major parties will spend their time effectively making like trying to make spoilers out of other candidates. It's a common thing it's a common practice. Democrats will fund the Libertarian and Constitution Party candidates a bit, and by fund them, I mean like it varies. Like there was an article by like Open Secrets that went into detail about this, explaining like, oh, like sometimes they'll like have mailers, like they'll raise money for mailers, and then there are some other times where it'll be like they'll directly fund the candidate, but then there are other times they'll do it like a little differently. Like for example, in the like this instance right here was a person paid a no party affiliated candidate to file in the race, and that has happened a bit as well. Like in Montana, the Montana Green Party openly stated they would not be running a candidate in 2020, not for the presidency, not for the Senate race, not for the House race, not for any races. But then, all of a sudden, the day before the, like, primary bid, it was like the day before the filing deadline, all of a sudden, their entire slate was filled because the Republican Party had paid a bunch of Green Party members, or a bunch of people to file in the Green Party primary. Sometimes it'll happen in a lot of other ways. For example, a lot of other times they'll do it in a way that will try to like make it so that third party candidate is like seen by like other people. The 2018 Montana Senate race, the Democratic candidates, like the Democrat, like Claire McCaskill, was like raising money and sending mailers to Republican voters, spreading word about the Libertarian nominee and the like a conservative independent candidate that were like, oh, Josh Hawley, he's a fake conservative, but these guys know what's really real. And the same thing happened. A similar thing happened with like Jamie Harrison in like the 2020 election. Jamie Harrison, the Democratic candidate in Lindsey Graham's seat, basically ran an ad literally saying like belled blood. Like he basically ran an ad that was like, Lindsey Graham stinks, but you know who stinks more? The Constitution Party candidate in this race. He's further to the right than Lindsey Graham. While Lindsey Graham was talking about like, oh, I don't like Trump during the election. Bill has been like a Trump supporter from day one and is undyingly loyal to Donald Trump. Basically running an ad, basically like trying to get people to like vote for this conservative like third party candidate. This is bound to happen when you have a system that doesn't allow third party candidates to have anything viable more than the supposed spoiler like thing. But ultimately, like again, I've questioned some things about the spoiler myth, some things not. I don't know. You have to run it at least by case basis before you actually like do anything about it. Anyways, the next story: Arkansas legislature passes a bill to allow EMTs and doctors to refuse to treat LGBTQ people. A proposed legislation that is being called one of the most extreme and deadly anti-LGBTQ healthcare bill seen in years is heading to the governor's desk in Arkansas. SB 289, dubbed the Medical Ethics and Diversity Act, seeks to give medical workers a right to refuse providing healthcare to someone because of the worker's religious or moral ethical beliefs. That could open the door for LGBTQ people to face denial from life-saving services from doctors, nurses, or EMTs. The bill was previously rejected by the Arkansas House Public Health, Welfare, and Labor Committee over criticism that it was too broad before it passed. Last month, it made it out of committee, then was returned with amendments, passed to the committee again, passed the House. Like, this bill is really, like, just point blank, like, discrimination. Like, look at me, this isn't even, like, a thing where people are, like, this is point blank just, like, genocide of gay people. This is really all you're doing. Genocide. Now I know what you may be saying. That's a bit harsh, but think about it. If an entire state gives people the right to reject giving gay people their freaking like medical treatments, I mean, what else is there? This isn't even like the conservative argument of like, well, I mean, technically it is the conservative argument on multiple levels, hating gays and, I don't know, like they think that, like the whole thing about them thinking like medical treatment is like it's a service, so it doesn't count as a right and blah, blah, blah. But like, this is literally the conservative argument of like, oh, well, they can have the right to reject them. Like, think about it. I'm going to tell you point blank, and especially considering this is just a fact. Like, if any of you are like agnostic on this bill or anything like that, let me tell you this. If a bill passed tomorrow saying that a doctor had the right to refuse medical service to a person who they consider racially inferior, would you be in favor of that bill? No. And that's the thing people do not grasp because they don't understand LGBTQ issues. Like, they do not acknowledge the fact that LGBTQ people do not choose this. This is what they're born as. This is the same thing as denying based on race. This is discrimination and should not be tolerated. And anybody with their right mind should be against this bill 100%. Okay, so speaking of a House bill, like going on the bad things, let's go to more bad things. A Joe Biden story. Biden back at it again with his not smart ideas. Biden pushes Colombia to restart glyphosate spraying program. Experts, the recently announced decision sends an unfortunate message to the Colombian people that your administration is not committed to abandoning the ineffective and damaging war on drugs internationally. After a 6-year halt, Colombia plans to restart the toxic aerial spraying of glyphosate on coca crops. That's fucking stupid. Again, I'm tired. So, as early as next month, drawing most welcome support from U.S. President Donald. Why do like I said, I'm tired. And I'm not deleting this because this gives me more personality. I'm keeping it in. Joe Biden and sharp criticism of 150 regional experts who wrote to Biden, your administration is implicitly endorsing former President Trump's damaging legacy in Colombia. On March 2nd, the Biden administration welcomed Colombia's decision to restart its aerial coca eradication program. The Biden's first annual 2021 International Narcotics Control Strategy Report. The government of Colombia has committed to restarting its aerial coca eradication program, which would be most welcome development. Now, for those who don't know, coca is, of course, cocaine. Like, it's basically cocaine. It's the crop that is used to make cocaine. It has other uses, but I think it's primarily used for that. Well, I mean, I don't even say primarily used. There are other aspects of it, obviously. And glyphosate, it's not the most well-known, chemical to be used to kill plants. Like, prominently, it was used in Monsanto. So, yeah, definitely not the best idea. And by that, I mean absolutely insane. But, that's the bad thing about the Biden administration. As I stated prior to the election, like, yes, Biden might be better than Trump. I will give you that. But that doesn't mean that his betterness is, like, extremely better. And that's why I didn't vote for him. I didn't think that the changes he would make would be, like, so drastic that we would actually need, like, to put him in the White House. His only effectiveness was just getting rid of Donald Trump. That is all his purpose was. So yeah, now that we're on that, now let's move on to some mixed news. First, Chuck Schumer tells labor leaders PRO Act gets a floor vote with 50 co-sponsors. Basically, here's what happened. Like, the PRO Act, as we all know, is that super pro-union bill that has been pushed in the House of Representatives and has passed overwhelmingly, and many union leaders are trying to get this bill passed as fast as they can because it's the most comprehensive, like, pro-union bill, like, ever. But the problem is, Chuck Schumer is not bringing it to a vote yet. He's saying that he wants to wait until the bill gets 50 co-sponsors. Now, many people were weirded out by this, like, why not just bring it to a vote now? Now, let me explain why he's probably waiting. The bill currently has 45 co-sponsors, which, right now, guarantees well, I mean, I'm not even sure, like, 100% guarantee. It doesn't guarantee, but it's a strong indication that 45 people are going to vote for it. The fact that it does not have 50 is a slight issue, because that means 5 members of the Senate are either just flat out not supporting the bill, or are just choosing to sit out of the bill, like being in this field. Which is a problem, because, if you only, the only way that this bill is going to get passed is if every single Democrat votes for it, and then, Kamala Harris breaks the tie. There isn't going to be a single Republican who votes for this bill. You're fooling yourself if you're going to think that any Republican is going to vote for this bill. If a Republican does vote for this bill, I'll commend them, but for the most part, it's safe to guarantee that no Republican's going to vote for this bill. Now, if all 50 Democrats co-sponsor it, that means, it means you effectively got, it's the same thing. It's a strong indication that 50 Democrats are going to vote for it, which leads us into this. The 5 people who are not co-sponsoring it. Kyrsten Sinema, Mark Kelly, Joe Manchin, Mark Warner, and Angus King. Those are the people not co-sponsoring it. Get them on the sponsorship. Now again, more not so good news. Let's move to Israel. Now that's not the bad news, but this is the bad news. Israel held another election not that long ago, the 23rd, and looks like we're gonna get to election number 5 in 1 year. Literally, in Israel, they can't form a coalition. There has effectively not been a coalition at this point. And the way that the, parties are divided, there doesn't seem to be any room for coalition. Benjamin Netanyahu has 30 seats, Likud has 30 seats. Yesh Atid has 17 seats. Shas has 9 seats. Blue and White has 8. Yamina has 7. Labor has 7. UTJ has 7. Yisrael has 7. Religious Zionist has 6. Joint List has 6. New Hope has 6. Meretz has 6. And Ram has 4. Okay, so as you can see, and you might think, oh, well, doesn't that mean Netanyahu wins? Well, no. You need 61 seats to get a majority. And if you don't have that 61 seats, you don't win. It doesn't count. Now, yes, of course, this means it's time for them to start building coalitions, but the fact of the matter is, there won't be a coalition, or at least, as of this point, we don't know if there will be a coalition. You see, we don't exactly understand the, ins and outs of this, because, coalitions have fallen in the Israeli elections before. Blue and White and Likud were supposed to form a coalition that was supposed to end the gridlock, but then they just started the gridlock again. And Joint List, which was originally the largest left party, has kind of drifted all the way to the bottom. So, and even if it was at the top, it doesn't matter, because Labor, Meretz, Joint List, and a couple other left parties. I mean, I think those are actually the only left parties, but Ram is a Arab party, which is sort of left on some things and right wing on other things. So it's they're all kind of lost. Effectively, and this shows how bad the coalitions will be. Ram, let me tell you the Ram ideology. It is conservative. It is for Israeli Arab interests. It's for a two-state solution. It's anti-Zionist. It's Islamist. It's socially conservative and anti-gay. So that means that's going to be hard for certain coalitions, because Joint List, Labor, and Meretz, which are the left-wing parties and usually the Arab-friendly parties, especially Joint List, they are the ones who are sort of in that realm of they're in the realm of potentially joining a coalition with them, but they're not necessarily going to do that due to the fact that he's point blank anti-gay, and most of these groups are pro-gay. I think all of them are, but due to the fact that they're anti-Zionist, it's sort of unlikely that he'll form a coalition with someone like Likud, who is super pro-Zionist. So it's very unlikely that there's going to be a coalition in that regard. We don't necessarily know how the coalition is going to break down. United Arab List / RAM, they are technically in the whispers of a coalition with Likud, because they're kind of sellouts, but they're doing the rational, not the rational, but they're doing the super conservative things. So you're going to try and build that as a coalition. But it's very likely that they're just going to keep doing this election over and over again until one party literally just has 61 votes, which is very unlikely. So maybe Israel should just start writing a new constitution to make make it, instead of 61 to form like a majority, maybe have 51, at least have a slim majority or whatever. So anyways, now let's move on to a bit of good news. The House panel votes to repeal 19 old Iraq war authorization. The House Foreign Affairs Committee on Thursday advanced a measure to repeal the nearly 2-decade-old authorization of the use of military force in Iraq, lawmakers' first efforts to claw back their war-making powers under President Joe Biden. The plan's action, which sailed through with support from Democrats and Republicans alike, scraps the 2002 authorization for the use of military force against Iraq, which at the time was led by Saddam Hussein. A similar push already underway in the Senate, where Senators Tim Kaine and Todd Young have proposed repealing the 2002 AUMF, in addition to a 1991 measure that also authorized military force in Iraq during the Gulf War. So yeah, looks like we're finally going to get the authorization of military force against Iraq repealed, which is a good thing. I 100% think that it's a good thing that we should get rid of, because it wasn't needed then, it's not needed now. Let's get rid of it. So yeah, now that we have all out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this episode. We are going to talk about that fabled thing that everybody on the internet seems to have some sort of opinion on. What do I mean by that? The left populist, right populist alliance. Oh boy. The left-right populist alliance. This, for those who do not know what this idea is, I would argue, where have you been? But this is basically what it is, because, if you're a fan of the show, you should know that, well, I'll get to that when I get to that. The idea of the right-wing, left-wing populist alliance comes from, many of the left-wing online figures such as Kyle Kulinski, Jimmy Dore, and a couple of other people, and just people otherwise outside of that sphere, who argue that the divide between Americans is not left versus right, it is actually populism versus establishmentarianism, and if the right side and left side of the populist spectrum work together, then maybe, potentially, they will be able to take down the oligarchy and establishment, and it's still whatever. It's this huge sort of fantasy that people have been pushing for a long time. In fact, many people have kind of tried to build their brand on the internet with this in mind. People like Jimmy Dore, he's been trying to build let's work with the Boogaloo Boys, who are a right-wing populist group. Or a lot of other people, people praise Rand Paul or Josh Hawley and claim they're the real populists. There are people who just say we need to fight as populists and reject the idea of even just the notion of a left populist versus a right populist, when in actuality they're all populists. And even when I was a wee young online podcast boy, I kind of sort of also agreed with certain aspects of the idea, and the fact that I'm laughing at it should probably give you an indication of what I think about it now. Nowadays, I kind of have some reservations on how it's executed. Now, you see, here's the thing. Let me explain why, and why people have been weary of certain I've 100% liked left-wing populism. That's 100% truth. One of my favorite political figures, a lot of them are left-wing populists. Bernie, AMLO, Lazaro Cardenas, who's some other left-wing like figures that are cool, like Hugo Chavez. I mean, I'm not necessarily a Hugo Chavez stan, but like I like Hugo Chavez. He's cool. Basically the entirety of the pink tide. Left-wing populism is like a really big thing. People love it. To the point where a lot of lefties on the internet will like actually just use the name populist. Like, oh, we're populists because we're advocating for the people. And that's kind of where certain elements fail. You see, there's certain things you need to understand. I mean, it's one thing a lot of people don't necessarily grasp, which is why a lot of this fails. Now, why do people not grasp this? Very simple. People just don't know what things mean. I'll just be honest. There are people who legitimately don't know what terms mean. Like, for example, populism. Many people don't understand what the term populist means. Well, here's a literal textbook definition of populism. Populism refers to a range of political stances that emphasizes the idea of the people and often juxtapose this group against the elite. Okay? That's populism. Everybody agrees. Yeah, that's populism. Everybody and their mom knows that's populism. However, there's a problem when you try to insert a political label to that. Now, we know what left-wing populism is, right? Well, a good majority of us should know that because a lot of us, have sort of attachments to left-wing populist figures. That's not where we're getting the problem. The problem is when we get to the label right-wing populist. You see, there is a whole lot of people who legitimately do not grasp what the term right-wing populist means. And I am guilty of that as well, but not due to my own faults. Well, I mean, I'll be fair, it was kind of my fault that I didn't look further into it. But then I did look further into it, and I'm like, oh. And there are people on the internet, I'll name names, Jimmy Dore, Kyle Kulinski, and like I'll call them out by name, yeah, Kyle Kulinski's guilty of this as well, that miscue what right-wing populist means, again, in the same vein of like, right-wing populism, like this, in this idea of like right-wing, left-wing populist alliance. People who say like, oh, if the right-wing populists and the left-wing populists work together, then they'll end the elites. They'll crush the elites once and for all. You always have to ask them, point blank, what do you mean by right-wing populist? Because two things. One, you'll notice that they'll have a vastly different opinion than someone else on the same issue. And two, it will not be what right-wing populist means. You see, let me give you some examples. Donald Trump, Brian Carroll, Richard Spencer, Rand Paul, what do all of those people have in common? They are all labeled right-wing populist by somebody, despite the fact that technically, sort of, they don't necessarily fall under those labels. Ron Paul is, of course, a libertarian, or Rand, I don't know if I said Rand. Maybe I said Rand instead of Ron, but it doesn't matter, same thing. They're libertarians, not necessarily right-wing populists. Now you might say, but anti-war is popular, so how are they not right-wing populists? That's not what right-wing populist means. That's what a lot of people say. Kyle Kulinski being the biggest, person who does this. They think that the term right-wing populist means Republicans who are favoring something like a Medicare for all or ending the wars, a traditionally left-wing position, because it's popular. No, that's not what it means. I can't believe I fell for this. I can't believe that Kyle said this. He's a guy who has a political science degree. How can he think that's what it means? That's not what it means. Right-wing populism is not Republicans who agree with left-wing politics. Because you know what that's called? Republicans who agree with left-wing politics. Or a left-wing Republican. They're not right-wing populists. That's not what it means. That's usually the answer you're going to get out of these people. Like, oh, they're just Republicans who agree with left-wing politics. No. That's not what it means. Here is the textbook definition of right-wing populism. Right-wing populism is a political ideology which combines right-wing politics and populist rhetoric and themes. The rhetoric often consists of anti-elitist sentiments, opposition to the establishment, and speaking to the common people. You see, it's not right-wingers who agree with left-wing politics. That's not what it means. This is what it means. And I don't get how, for some reason, they don't grasp this. Because that's the same thing with left-wing politics. You mix left-wing politics with populism. That's what left-wing populism means. How come you don't grasp that that's the same thing with the right-wing populism? And that's the same thing. And here's the thing. One of the other terms for right-wing populism is literally right-wing nationalism. Because nationalism is a lot like populism. It's not a set principles. Populism is not this is policy A of populism. This is policy B of populism. This is policy C, D, E, F of populism. That's not how populism works. And the same thing with nationalism. It's not a set policies. It's a broad idea. Populism is fighting for the people. Nationalism is big national pride to the point where you're chauvinistic about it. While sure, the ideas may inherently start off on one side of the aisle, left-wing populism. Populism is normally considered a left-wing idea because you're we're fighting for the common man, we're fighting for the little guy. And nationalism inherently starts off as a right-wing idea because of the whole idea of they push, it's just how right-wingers have this huge traditional national pride and stuff. But the thing is, doesn't mean that they can't be flipped. AMLO in Mexico is considered a left-wing nationalist because he harkens back to national pride of his country from a leftward period. He harkens back to the Benito Juárez's and the Lázaro Cárdenas's. And the same thing goes with right-wing populism. They can harken back to a time period where you're pushed for right-wing populist positions. And the thing about right-wing populism is it's not even exactly the same in every nation, but they grasp upon similar ideas. Mass immigration, fighting back against the liberal media, because that's how you get people on your side. That's what it is. And like I said before, with those four figures can all be identified as right-wing populists for many different reasons. Rand Paul rallies against the elites from his libertarian perspective. Libertarians are pushed to the bottom. So he's oh, I'm gonna fight with you on this thing. Trump spent his whole campaign running on the Mexicans are coming to take our borders and stuff. Brian Carroll, many people don't know who he is, but he's this Christian Democratic guy who would fit into the Kyle Kalinske version of right-wing populist. But then there's Richard Spencer, which is what many people point to. Right-wing populist movements usually inherently go to fascism. And many people try to push against this, oh no, right-wing populism isn't fascism. Yeah, maybe it's I use this example all the time because this is a good example. Just because every square, every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. It's because the definition of a rectangle, a square fits that definition. But a definition of a square, a rectangle doesn't fit into that definition. While technically, inherently, not all right-wing populists are fascists, all fascists are right-wing populists. Because that's what their whole message is. Fighting for the people. Not to use this example because this is the big internet no-no, but Hitler, he was 100% a right-wing populist. They fight for the idea of we're fighting for the common man. We're fighting for the common German, man. The elite media, they're the ones evil in charge. We gotta fight against the liberal democracies and stuff. That's what he was preaching. And that's what many people in America also were preaching around the same time. And we'll get to that too, because this is one thing people don't like to point out too. When you let right-wing populists into a group, that group will kind of turn bad. The thing with right-wing populist groups, they'll usually turn to fascism. And I'm going to use this example because this is what happened. Grumpy Bernie Sanders posted a tweet saying, like, if the left populists and the right populists work together, they would defeat the oligarchy. I use this example all the time because it's hilarious, and it shows that they just don't grasp the politics of anything. You're basically saying with that tweet that Lula and Bolsonaro should work together because that's who they are, right populists and left populists. Well, not respectively. I don't remember which order I said them in, but like Lula's definitely a left populist, Bolsonaro's right populist. And Bolsonaro, he's basically become full-on fascist. And that's the same thing with like America. You're basically saying Bernie and Trump should work together to defeat the oligarchy. And that's what you're saying about like, Hitler and stuff. You're basically saying, oh, the communists and Hitler or the social democrats and Hitler should have worked together to defeat blank. In a Mexican perspective, you'd be like, oh, Emiliano Zapata should have worked with Victoriano Huerta to like defeat the evil liberals. That's what you're saying. And, certain people do want you to say that because, fascists will use that to infiltrate left-wing groups. It's happened before and it'll happen again. I'll use 2 American examples from World War II. 2 groups that were considered very left-wing, very left-wing populist, but sort of wanted to branch out and to do other things. First, we'll start off with the one that many people probably heard of because I've mentioned it frequently on this channel. The Union Party and Charles Coughlin and Huey Long and stuff. Huey Long was a huge left-wing populist, and a lot of people followed his left-wing populist footsteps. But a guy by the name of Charles Coughlin, who was a radio host at the time, he was a follower of Huey Long as well, but then sort of started drifting into this idea of we need to build up a huge coalition. We can't just rely on the left to try and split the left vote and stuff. We need to branch out and form a larger coalition of more populists. His solution was to go to fascists because those are what right-wing populists were. They were fascists. Fascists run solely on right-wing populist rhetoric in order to get people to rile them up. That's the thing about fascist leaders. There is no such thing as a not charismatic fascist leader. That's, that take that clip out of context 100%. People are going to, but that's the truth. Every fascist leader has had charisma, has had charm, has been able to reach the people, because that's how they reach you. You're not gonna find some random guy on the street who can't talk for shit, who doesn't know anything. You gotta get someone who is smart, who knows what he's talking about, and can talk to a crowd and be respected. That's how these groups manage to get powerful. And that's what Charles Coughlin was able to do as well. He pushed for this kind of rhetoric and stuff. And tried to reach for these right-wing populists, which were literally just Nazi sympathizers. And the Union Party basically became a fascist party by the end of its term. Well, not its term, its tenure. And then literally evolved into neo-fascistic movements in the United States, like Gerald L.K. Smith's Christian National Crusade. Now that one is the one that you might know on this channel, but I should talk about this one as well, because this is another prominent example. What happened to the American First Committee? Now, I know you've probably heard a version of the story, but I think you should probably grasp the full concept of the story, because it's, again, a prime example of this. It's a good one. It's a good example. And, I don't necessarily want, people to, misstate what the American First Committee was, because I've seen a lot of people, misstate it in a way that, makes it seem like the whole time it was a bad movement, when in fact it was not, and it actually just serves as a lesson in a different field. So basically, the American First Committee was a group of people that was effectively opposed to World War II. Now, this was prior to Pearl Harbor, so certain bad things were happening. The Nazis were still doing their thing. The thing that America and the rest of the world would eventually learn is called the Holocaust. But not a majority of Americans knew what the Holocaust was. They knew Hitler was anti-Semitic, but many Americans either were anti-Semitic themselves or had grown up in an area where anti-Semitism was so prominent that they were just that's just my neighbor across the street. Effectively, this is a weird tangent, but effectively, what Americans thought that Hitler was doing was basically just moving the Jews to ghettos. That's all they thought they were doing for the majority of the war. While there were some, like, Jewish immigrants who would, like, escape and, like, go to the United States and try to pressure people and be like, this is what the Nazis are doing, people were like, this is so big of a scale, we can't buy it. Then eventually America had to learn, oh, damn. Like, they had to learn the hard way, unfortunately, which is terrible. But, I mean, that's what they originally thought it was just, like, basically redlining. And America was just like, we do that here, so what's the problem? And basically, American, like, groups were, like, who were opposed to the war, like, all joined together and formed a national coalition to, like, push for, like, you know, America to stay out of the war. And that, of course, actually led to a huge rainbow coalition of sorts. The coalition had been made up by, like, a lot of very different groups. You know, New Deal liberals who were originally very hesitant to, like, go into another world war. Conservative isolationists who were sort of, like, in that realm of, like, oh, like, they were basically, like, sort of, like, proto-libertarians in a sense. Progressives who were, like, opposed to war for various reasons. That were, like, you know, like Burton K. Wheeler and, like, such. Socialists who were inherently anti-war. You know, mostly various groups of not populists, pacifists, you know, people who were opposed to war for various reasons, you know, religious, political, and such. While not originally a group founder, communists became a major part of the group in a sense, you know, because, like, not really in the sense of, like, being, like, major, like, leaders in the group, but, like, they were definitely part of, like, membership because, like, you know, some communists did oppose the war at some point due to calls for the Soviet Union to oppose the war. You know, various amounts of apolitical people who just didn't want to go to war because they knew they would be drafted were part of the group. Those sort of, like, vague populist types, you know, like, long in a sense. And lastly, ninth member of the group, people who were sympathetic to the Nazis' perspective. Fascists, extremely hardline fascists, were part of the group. Now, originally, you know, think about it, those are 9 different ideological groupings in, like, this massive group. So, a couple of fascists in there doesn't really seem notable at first. However, as the war continued, many groups of people slowly started changing their minds in regards to the war. You know, New Deal liberals were kind of starting to listen into FDR in a sense where he was like, I mean, the war, we're not necessarily in favor of the war, but maybe we should actually, like, leave this anti-war coalition, like, maybe, like, hear FDR out. Then, like, communists were, like, pushed out of the group to, like, pressure people to fight the Nazis. Socialists started getting a bit more hesitant about the war, like, being opposed to the war, and started, like, hearing out certain people on certain aspects of the war. Many of the apolitical people were starting to, like, you know, be pushed into, like, actually making a formed decision about the war. And, like, a decent majority of them started actually, like, starting supporting efforts of the war. So now all of a sudden you have 5 groups of people. And all of a sudden, one of those groups of people, those, like, vague populist long types, were also starting to be shifted over into the fascist wing. So effectively you have 4 major groups now, and one of them is openly fascist. So, effectively, it went from 1/9 of the group to 1/4 of the group. So all of a sudden, they got, like, a larger fascist faction in this group. And then effectively, you know, like, let's be fair, those right-wing isolationists could sort of be considered somewhat fascistic. So that's effectively 1/3 of the group. Like, you know, those extreme right-wing isolationists that are like, America is the best nation in the world and we need to 100% like be in favor of it and stuff and blah, blah, blah. They're effectively, like, sort of not necessarily fascist, but, like, you know, sort of like, if America became fascist, they wouldn't mind, really, because they were usually, like, people who are, like, on the, like, did well enough to live, people who were doing well during the Depression, so, you know, that kind of jazz. But, like, even, like, as the war went on, you know, those fascists in the group were louder, had a larger faction of the group. Well, there were still people who were still, like, being nice and, like, good-hearted people. Eventually, even they started, like, being hesitant about the war, so they're like, we're gonna leave, like, not hesitant about the war, I keep saying it like hesitant about the war, but I mean, like, hesitant against being against the war, so even they started leaving. But by that point in time, that group had already been taken over by fascists, and, like, America had already been pressured into, like, going into the war, so they really had no footing, and no fascist group was able to, like, coalesce in that era, because America had grown to have this huge anti-fascist sentiment. That was two groups in like relatively short amounts of time periods that were like populist, like right-wing populists, or even just flat-out populists, and then like shifted towards fascistic tendencies. So like, this is not necessarily a good idea, and like, especially considering a lot of these people who are like doing this sort of like right-wing populist like movement literally do openly say they want to work with fascists. Nico House, being one of the primary leaders of this, he's working with like Jack Posobiec, who is a literal fascist, and I don't care, Shauna Burley, if you were like, it's a fascist, you're supporting a person on Twitter that you don't like. Literally fascism, and you too, Chad Wilson, you follow Jack Posobiec, you follow a fascist, 100%. You can't change my mind because it's true. It's literally like saying, if I follow Bernie Sanders, I don't follow, and I'm like, no, he's not a socialist. That would be untrue. And then, like, there are people who will, like, point this out, like, most right-wing populist groups just turn out to be fascist groups. Like, if they're not fascist now, they turn into fascist groups. Then people will literally respond with, like, oh, we don't care. Like, there's a person who literally said, I'm okay with working with white nationalists. I'm not kidding. It was an African-American woman who said they were openly okay with working with fascists. Then there was this other African-American guy who said he was okay with working with fascists, but I'm 100% convinced that he was a bot, so it doesn't matter. And like this whole like idea of like this right-wing, left-wing populist group, it's not gonna happen. Well, people will make it happen. It will happen to a degree, but like you need to be wary of this, because as many people have been saying on Twitter, this is effectively just being a red-brown alliance. For those who don't know what that is, Red-Brown Alliance is literally a socialist-fascist alliance, like the Nazbols or like the Strasserites. That's what you're trying to be pushing. That's what they're trying to push you into. That is what they're pushing you into. Now, again, I should preface it with this. That does not mean you should not work with people you disagree with on certain subjects on your terms. Like, for example, I just said at the beginning of this episode, communists, they drive me crazy. That doesn't mean that when there's a thing where me and a communist is in agreement, that doesn't mean like I'm just gonna be like, nope, I'm not gonna work with them because they're communist. That doesn't mean that. I'm going to like say, hey, let's work together on this thing. We disagree on this, but like who cares? Let's work on this. The same thing with like working with libertarians and such. Yes, you may disagree with the libertarians on like economics and stuff, but you agree with them on foreign policy more than likely, so why not work with them on that, and work with them on drugs and stuff? To quote Henry Wallace, I'm not following their line, but if they choose to follow my line, I say God bless them. And that means working with everybody. Liberals, conservatives, but you have to do it on your terms, like on the left's terms. If you get them to agree with you on their terms, then that's a good thing. And another reason why this is like a big BS thing is because like the whole thing about right-wing populism and left-wing populism that many people have pointed out with like Crystal and Sagar, they agree on the problems. Yes, left-wing populists and right-wing populists, they agree on the problems. They agree that the elite is destroying the people. But literally anybody can say that. The elite is destroying the people. That means nothing. What's the power of the elites? What is their grouping? What is their ideology? And when you go into actual specifics, you'll realize you're not going to get the answers that you want. Like if you go to a conservative, like a right-wing populist, and then put like let's do this example. You put a left-wing populist and a right-wing populist in the group. You sit them both down. Okay? You ask them, who is ruining the America? They will say the elites. Okay, yes, the left-wing populists, what is the religion of the elites? They will say, well, America is mostly a Christian nation, so I'm going to have to take a guess and just say they're probably more than likely Christian. Okay, right-wing populist, what's the religion of the elites? They will say that they think that they're Jewish because Jewish people control the media. Or they're not going to say that. They're going to say, well, Jewish people are overrepresented in places of power. Now, that's one thing. Then you'll say, okay, why is there a huge amount of jobs that are not being given to, like, why is there a huge job loss in America? Left-wing populists? Well, it's usually because companies at the top, they'll usually like, try to gouge their workers, and like people are not necessarily willing to work for like a, bourgeoisie, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Right-wing populists? Oh, simple. The Mexicans are taking our jobs. Okay. What are your thoughts on immigration? Oh, left-wing populist? Do you think that immigration is really good? Okay. Right-wing populist? You don't like immigration. Left-wing populist? What's the major political view of the media? Oh, I believe that the media is like, mostly controlled by like neolibs, centrist types, maybe some right-wingers, you know, people who like have a right-wing economic view, but maybe have like a mixed social view that are usually like war hawks and stuff. Okay. Right-wing populist? Oh, I think that I think the media is run by a bunch of like socialists. What's your evidence? Well, I mean, that's what you're gonna get. That is what you're gonna get. They think like that's literally what the difference is. Like you agree on the problems 100%, but you don't agree on the solutions, and that's why your alliance, this whole alliance idea, is inevitably only being pushed by people who are who are already in agreement with the right wing populists. If you're in this like field of like the right wing populist, left wing populist thing, you're being lied to, or you're being either lied to, or the person who's talking to you doesn't know what they're talking about. That's the truth. They either don't know what they're talking about, or they're lying. And if you need evidence that they are not necessarily of good faith, just ask them point blank, what do you mean by right-wing populists? That is always what you need to ask them, because if they can't give you the actual definition of right-wing populism, then they are ill-informed. But if they can sort of give you the actual definition, that means they're bad faith actors. Well, I mean, technically both of them are even true. So yeah, that's all I have to say on this topic. Right-wing populist, left-wing populist alliance is pretty much just fascist and socialist alliance, so red-brown is bad. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or check my articles on the Independent Political Report.